Well, good morning, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Sunday service. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, a big welcome to you as well. I'm sure you looked outside if you're in Florida and figured now's the day to stay in. But for you amphibious souls, we welcome you. And it's really kind of a theme we're going to riff on a little bit this morning, this idea of being amphibious, where we exist in two realities. We're able to move between two realms, just like an amphibian, land and water, or matter and spirit. And so, in a way, the soul is amphibious. And we're going to look today through this lens of myth and story in order to suss out a deeper understanding of this journey that we've been talking about for so long now, this journey from matter to spirit, and this cultivation or alchemization, if I can call it that, of the soul. That the soul is actually something that we're here to cultivate, to grow, to give life to give birth to. And if you think about this, long back in time, Vedic India had this understanding of what's called in Sanskrit dvija, twice born. And we get this in the biblical spirituality of you must be born from above or you must be born again to see the kingdom of God. In other words, you have to shift from physical sight to spiritual sight. You have to go from being a land animal to being able to swim in the waters of the spiritual dimension. And in order to do that, you have to cultivate a new creation within yourself. This is the alchemy, where you're taking base matter and turning it, transforming it into gold, which is the spirit. And so these teachings are designed for that purpose. And as we'll look this morning, the myths and the stories that we get are really helpful because they give us a way of recognizing magnetic north through this journey so that we're able to make these right choices. And, there's a biblical passage that we'll use kind of as a springboard this morning. It's one of those apocalyptic passages that you'll get in the Bible. Now, apocalyptic is actually a form of biblical literature that emerged a few hundred years before Jesus. And it was that people were expecting the end of the world. And apocalyptic literature is oftentimes you have a prophet or a seer who goes on a heavenly journey. And they're shown the whole cosmos, and they're shown how things must transpire within the earth realm in order to bring about this twice birth, this new birth, this emergence of spirit on the human level, so all creation can rise or ascend. And so this apocalyptic verse that we're using this morning as our springboard comes from the prophet Joel in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. And it says, multitudes and multitudes are gathered in the valley of decision before the great day of the Lord can come. And so this great day of the Lord is really the day of reckoning, right? The day where everything gets put into its right place, where everyone who has made the choice for light goes up into the higher realms, and everyone who's made the choice for darkness or ignorance goes down into the lower realms. And this is where we are in our human realm. It says within these teachings that we are the decision makers, that we are guiding or navigating our journey by our decisions. And so decisions at this level are vital because they're either giving birth to the soul or they're further shackling your mind with the entrapments of matter and passion. And so this is the story that we're going to be playing on this morning, this war between the material or fleshly nature and the soul nature that's often depicted within these teachings, much like we saw within the Bible, that the great day of the Lord is a day of wrath, a day of darkness, not light, where the forces of Gog and Magog and everyone who fights against Zion will be found within this valley of decision, and the Lord will make his decision and, judge the nations based on their iniquities and stuff like that, right? All this old-time religious language. And then from that war, we get the shift of the ages, right? A new age, a new heavens, a new earth comes into being. Well, this is a cycle. It's something that we've kind of been stripped out of thinking in our Western Anglo-European scientism that we've been indoctrinated with. A couple hundred years ago, they kind of stripped out this idea of cycles. They've stripped out this idea of what would be referred to as teleological thinking. In other words, we're all tending towards a goal, that we have potentials within us, and what time and space are designed to do is have us grow these organic qualities of the soul that are actually just part of our makeup. It's in our DNA. And if we were to just recognize that just like an acorn turns into an oak tree, and it has the blueprint within it, the code, to become an oak tree, well, human beings have a code to become divinized, to become beings of light, to become awakened, God-like beings, right? Christ beings. And so this idea of the cyclical qualities of nature, where we go through seasons of change and all part of this growth cycle that brings us into the fruition of our soul, that means then in previous cycles there were these great wars before the shift of the ages. And this is what we get in the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, we're told through legend, through the sacred teachings of the East, occurred right at the change or cusp between what is called the Dwapara Yuga and the Kali Yuga. And this is where Krishna and Arjuna and the Pandavas, this family of beings that were there for the light, for the growth of the soul, for knowledge, were fighting this end of the age battle with the Kauravas. And they were the forces of ignorance or darkness. And right after that great day of the Lord, or if you want to just use the literalism of Bhagavad Gita, the song of the Lord, we had a shift of the ages. And so we're going to look more closely into that great battle that was found within the Bhagavad Gita this morning as a way of being able to discern some of the important elements that we must take on this journey to awaken to the right decision, okay? So I think we'll have fun with this. I know I will. You're just extras in my movie anyway, so doesn't matter. We're going to begin this morning with prayers from the mother. This is Mira Alfasa's. She has. They published 18 volumes of her collected works. This is volume 1, Prayers and Meditations. And the mother was the, you can say, the co-founder of Integral Yoga with Sri Aurobindo. She died in 1973, and one of the great masters of our common era. She is known for her work in bringing about this transformation of body into pure spirit. This is her focus. And I thought some of these prayers and meditations were really fitting for us this morning, and they contain these crucial elements or touch points that we want to build on this morning. So this is an entry from August 2nd, 1913. This morning, as I was glancing over the month that is beginning and wondering how I can serve thee better, I heard the small voice within like a murmur in the silence, and this is what it said to me. See how very little all outer circumstances matter? Why strive and strain to realize thy own conception of truth? Be more supple, more trusting. The only duty is not to let oneself be troubled by anything. To torment oneself about doing the right thing causes as much harm as a bad will. Only in a calm as of deep waters can be found the possibility of true service. And this reply was so luminous and pure, it carried within itself such a striking reality that the state it described was communicated without any difficulty. It seemed to me I was floating in the calm of deep waters. I understood. I saw clearly what the best attitude would be. And now I have only to ask thee, O sublime Master, my supreme teacher, to give me the strength and clear-sightedness I need to remain constantly in this state. And the quote comes again. Do not torment thyself, child. Silence. Peace. Peace. So just to circle back for a moment, the divine voice gave her that instruction to torment oneself about doing the right thing causes as much harm as a bad will. Right? The mind is in a state of chaos and stress and upset because it's trying so hard to do it right. And that is just as much a disturbance, a spiritual malady, as having bad will. So the only true way of approach is to surrender and enter that oceanic calm. And then the voice will guide you from that calm mind. You know, on Thursday evenings, we have our Course in Miracles. We've been looking at that section in a course where he says, only a quiet mind can remember God. Eternal gentleness cannot be experienced with a mind that is in conflict. So even if we say that the conflict is for a good reason, if we are in a state of distress or unrest, we are not in that communication with that voice. And so I would just invite all of us as we travel this morning into this mythic realm of the Great War, that we are above the battleground. This is actually going to be Krishna's first instruction to his disciple, that when Arjuna sees the battle before him in chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita, he realizes these are all my family members and friends and uncles and grandfathers that I'm going to have to fight against. These are my people. What's the benefit that can come from that? So looking through his physical eyes, he's completely in a state of distress and doesn't want to engage in the spiritual struggle because it just looks like it's an impossibility. And so it says in the Gita that he sinks down in his chariot, the bow falls from his hand, and he can't utter another word. And it was then that Krishna began to impart to him this higher view of seeing with the eyes of the spirit or the Atma. And it was there that he began to look above the battleground. No longer is he in the midst of the conflict, but Krishna's instruction was to give Arjuna this quiet mind where he can rise above the throes of the senses and the confusions of the lower mind. And it's vital that we do that we have this inner resolve that isn't bending to the outer circumstance, but is, basically established in knowing this inner guidance is always here. But in order to hear it, we must be quiet and calm. Okay? So this is the invitation this morning. Another one from the mother. This is from August 17th, 1913. It says, O Lord, Master of our life, let us soar very high above all care for our material preservation. Nothing is more humiliating and depressing than these thoughts so constantly turned towards the preservation of the body. These preoccupations with health, the means of subsistence, the framework of life. How very insignificant is all this? A thin smoke that a simple breath can disperse, or a single thought turned towards thee dispel like a vain mirage. Right? So she's basically saying here, everything that we focus on is body related. And as soon as we turn our attention inward, we can see that all of it is vanity of vanities. It really has no substance, no true value, no lasting peace or pleasure. So she goes on, she says to the divine, deliver those who are in this bondage, O Lord, even as those who are the slaves of passion. On the path that leads to thee, these obstacles are at once terrible and puerile. Terrible for those who are yet under their sway, puerile for one who has passed beyond. Puerile is a word that we normally don't use anymore. It means childish. It means trivial. So what she's doing is making a distinction. If we are only living for the body and we're only here to indulge our senses, we're no better than children. And our minds are completely fascinated or hypnotized by the outside world of appearances, and we're led astray from the true value that is within this soul creation that a human being is given the opportunity to experience. So this is really another way of saying, being twice born, you become a spiritual adult. Without that second birth, you're little children. We're little children. And you see that a lot in the way that the Master speaks to his disciples in the New Testament. He's calling them little children a lot. And it's because we are still outside of the awareness of what's behind the appearance. You know what? It's the cord. So let's see. You can hear me now. Okay, good. So really important distinctions here. Let's not get distracted away from remembering as we move through this journey together this morning. We are here to grow in maturity and to awaken to this decision, which is really the decision to either stay asleep like little boys and girls or to graduate, wake up, realize our true potential, and uncover for ourselves this treasure that we've had all along and haven't been paying attention to because we've been attracted to the vanity, to the outside, to the trivial, to reality TV, not true reality. Okay? So this is, again, the final thing from the mother that we'll talk about this morning. And so just keep in mind, too, that when we're still within this immature view of being asleep spiritually, we don't really know true love. We know love from a childlike quality of what's in it for me. That's basically how a child thinks. Me, right? So it's always about getting something for me or defending the me, protecting the me, getting upset if you insult the me, right? The child is always me. When we start to wake up, we are in a place of recognizing that we're no longer pulled by those lower instincts or those lower drives. We're beyond that internal conflict of the senses, and we begin to have a pure love for all beings. We recognize that love knows no specialness. It's to be given universally to all. And that's the way we begin to remember how a soul loves, right? So here, pure and disinterested love, thy love, she says to God, in what we are able to perceive and manifest of it is the sole key. Oh, actually, as good as that is, it's not what I wanted to read. Forgive me. Here. In this calm concentration which comes before day. No, that's not it either. I'm sorry. These markers are very thin and transparent. Okay, now it'll make sense. Why all this noise, all this movement, this vain and futile agitation? Why this whirlwind, carrying men away like a swarm of flies caught in a storm? How sad is the sight of all that wasted energy, all those useless efforts. When will they stop dancing like puppets on a string, pulled they know not by whom or what? When will they find time to sit quietly and go within, to recollect themselves and open that inner door which screens from them thy priceless treasures, thy infinite boons? How sorrowful and miserable seems to me their life of ignorance and obscurity, their life of mad agitation and unprofitable dispersion. When one single spark of thy sublime light, one single drop of thy divine love can transform this suffering into an ocean of delight. O Lord, my prayer soars towards thee. May they know at last thy peace and that calm and irresistible strength which comes of an immutable serenity. The privilege of those whose eyes have been opened. And your eyes are open now, I bet. We got to call the governor and get those people fired too. I'm trying to hold service here. Everybody petition your governor's office first thing tomorrow. Where were we? Oh, yes. In serenity and prayer. O Lord. O Lord, my prayer soars towards thee. May they know at last thy peace and that calm and irresistible strength which comes of an immutable serenity, the privilege of those whose eyes have been opened and who are able to contemplate thee in the flaming core of their being. So this is that inner light that is unveiled to those who wake up, that are born again, Dvija, twice born. They literally see, feel, know that divinity dwells within their own core immediately. And then she finishes with this, but the hour of thy manifestation is come, and soon hymns of gladness will burst forth on every side. Before the solemnity of this hour, I bow down in devotion. So again, she's feeling this heralding event of God's manifestation. And what's kind of peculiar, and it occurred to me when I reflected on this passage, that it was written November 29th, 1913. In about 6 months' time, World War I will break out in July of 1914. And what's interesting is this idea of that we've been playing on, how the Great War in many ways beckons us to a higher place within ourselves, and I don't think our day is much different. If you're paying attention, you can hear the drums of war every time you turn on the news, Unfortunately, it seems the newscasters are wearing their war paint and going along with the whole thing. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Don't get nervous. But we are to rise above the cacophony of wayward voices and misguided people, and even the profiteers of war, which we will also talk about, because that is within the Bhagavad Gita, that our decision is not which illusion we would like, and that includes the illusion of religion. This isn't a decision to be a Christian or a Buddhist or a Jew or a Hindu and still be this untransformed, blind, and deaf person. It's to undergo the second birth in whatever tradition you feel affinity to that will take you there. Monday night, Course in Miracles. So there is a major difference between playing religion and experiencing the mysterium tremendum of religion. And that is when you begin to realize you have the core of your own being indwelt by the Holy Spirit, the presence of God. And so there's another story that we're going to talk about. This is Yogananda's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And he tells a story in chapter 16, his commentary, which I think is quite comical and brings the point home quite nicely. So Yogananda, a saint sat meditating under a bushy tree. A frightened man came running to him and said, "Please, holy sadhu, I'm going to hide in the tree above you. Don't tell the robbers pursuing me where I am, as they are after my gold and my life." The saint replied, "I cannot speak untruth, but I can remain silent." But the man warned him, "If you remain quiet, they may try to force the truth out of you. Just tell the robbers that I fled in the other direction. That will save both your life and mine." The saint remained stoically silent as the terrified man scrambled to conceal himself within the dense foliage of the tree. The robbers appeared and demanded to know the whereabouts of the man. The saint replied, "I won't tell you." But when the robbers threatened to kill him, he reminded himself that the scriptures, in addition to prescribing the telling of untruths, enjoin man to protect his life from destruction. He therefore pointed his finger toward the upper branches of the tree. The robbers dragged down their hapless victim, relieved him of his packet of gold, stabbed him to death, and went on their way. When the time came for the sadhu to leave his body after many years of scrupulous regard for the scriptural ordinances, he eagerly anticipated entering the heavenly realms. The apparently taintless saint was stopped, however, by the king of death, who told him, "Dear saint, no doubt you are very holy, but you have committed a terrible error of judgment, in punishment for which you must come with me and stay a while in Hades." The saint protested, "I have committed no sin. I have always pursued the path of truth." "Excuse me for contradicting you, dear one," the king of death replied, "but why didn't you point your finger in a wrong direction when that innocent man sought your protection from the robbers? Which was the greater sin? To misstate a fact, or to permit the man to be hacked to pieces because of your actions?" The saint belatedly understood the difference between truth and mere facts, and that truth implies real ultimate benefit to self and others. After atoning for his error in Hades, he was free to enter heaven. So what we were saying earlier about this isn't a decision amongst different religious belief systems that could oftentimes create more of a bigotry, exclusivism, and a closed-off point of view where we are still within an us versus them paradigm. And oftentimes you'll see it, as you saw it here, we actually try to justify our protection of the me within a religious or spiritual paradigm. That we know all of the right ways of getting out of feeling responsible for the infractions that we do, the harm that we cause to others. Like that man being hacked to death was because in his mind, the saint's mind, he was following the prescriptions of his spiritual teaching. But he didn't realize that by acting in that way of protecting himself, he was actually doing harm, both to himself and others. He ends up going to Hades, right, to suffer the punishments of his wrong choice. And so Yogananda is making this valuable point that we want to put in our bag on our journey, our little rucksack. And that is, there's a difference between fact and truth. And as he points out here, following up on the story, Yogananda says, sin committed consciously or unconsciously brings evil results, even as poison, whether swallowed intentionally or unintentionally, brings death. Failure to discern true righteousness and to conform one's actions accordingly yields painful karmic results, no matter how couched in supportive spiritual truths. So in other words, when you act in a way that harms another, it doesn't matter if you're trying to justify it with your scriptures or your spiritual teachings. He says you're drinking poison, and that poison will do its damage. That's why he then says, without awakening the faculty of intuition, you'll never be able to discern the truth. You'll be in a world of facts, and you'll never have that awakening of the spiritual vision, because that comes through an intuitive mind, not a thinking mind, right? So again, put that in your sack, and we'll take that along with us. Good so far? Well, in a way, yes. Disney's loaded with this stuff. In fact, Carl Jung, much like what we saw in the mother's experience of this impending heralding of God's revealing. Are you familiar with Carl Jung's The Red Book? It was published posthumously in 2007. It was kept secret all of those years, and finally his family allowed it to be published and released. It was really what was the source behind all of Jung's psychology. And Jung had these prophetic visions in 1913. He was seeing all of Europe covered in blood. He was experiencing voices that were telling him that there are going to be many slain bodies, etc. About a dozen different visions, which preceded his descent into the unconscious, which was what the Red Book is. The Red Book is Jung having a conversation with the denizens of his own unconscious. It's quite fascinating. And it was, again, an apocalyptic form of literature where Jung's guide takes him through the different ways of thinking that opened him up to what Jung later came to discern as a mythic kind of thought process. This is why I'm bringing it up here. That our minds can think logically and linearly and factually, and we can also switch channels and think imagistically or imaginally and mythically. And it's this mythological thinking that Jung and Campbell and many others, like you see this throughout ancient history, that the tantrics call it twilight language. It's a mythological way of using language where symbols are given at this level where we can understand them, like the Great War. But they're portals into your unconscious to wake you up to the spiritual dimension. So this is what Jung recognized, that these myths, if seen or understood correctly with this higher vision, will be ways of accessing what the mother was just saying, these treasure troves of God that are hidden in plain sight, but because we're tuned to the wrong channel, we're not seeing them. We're not experiencing them. So this is, the onus is on each one of you to make that inner shift, to begin to think differently. And how do we do that? Relax. Open yourself. Become quiet. Because one of the things that Jung was able to discern between the two ways of thinking, when you're thinking factually, it's very active, and you're trying to bring your own references and your own meanings to what you're hearing. The imaginal or mythic way of thinking is passive. So you just allow things to wash through you. And you begin to have your own psychopomp or your own inner guide emerge in your awareness, the voice of the Holy Spirit. As you get quiet, you'll have this inner movement and be guided towards your own depths. Okay? So this is where we want to go into our next leg of the journey this morning as we open Sri Aurobindo's commentary of the Bhagavad Gita. So like I had mentioned, the Gita is taking place on the battlefield. And the battlefield is this valley of decision. It's where, in fact, the Gita's opening passage is that the two armies were gathered together in Dharma Kshetra Kurukshetra. Dharma is the principles of awakening, the laws of God. And Kshetra means field. So it's the field of awakening to God, and it's the battlefield at the same time. So what I'm trying to do here, as the Gita's doing, is taking a worldly situation and seeing it mythically. That where we are right now can be seen factually, and that actually serves to keep you enslaved as little children, to be puppets with others pulling your strings, or you can wake up and be spiritual adults and see through appearances. It's so vital right now. Vital. And we'll see why. So Krishna is giving Arjuna that instruction right off the hop. Stop looking through your physical sight. It's going to depress you. It's going to make you feel despondent and powerless and fragmentary and hopeless. That's what your physical sight will show you when you're looking at this big stress in your life. And then he says, the calm and wise mind, the thinker, the calm and wise mind, the thinker who looks upon life steadily and doesn't allow himself to be disturbed and blinded by his senses and emotions, is not deceived by material appearances. Sri Aurobindo goes on. He does not allow the clamor of his blood and his nerves and his heart to cloud his judgment or to contradict his knowledge. He looks beyond the apparent facts of the life of the body and senses. Did you hear that? Looks beyond the facts of the body and the senses. You got to switch channels. Twilight language. You go in. It's a dimensional shift. And you have the capacity to experience this higher reality right here. But you have to begin to realize you must give up the hypnotic spell of the body and the senses, to the real fact of his being. That's where he looks and rises beyond the emotional and physical desires of the ignorant nature to the true and only aim of the human existence, which is what? Giving birth to your soul, bringing the Christ within into manifestation. Okay, so when we are doing this inner work, we are no longer being tossed about by the winds of the senses and the desires of the body. This becomes the way that you actually will your awakening. You see, this doesn't happen if you don't will it. God can't come down, or the fairy godmother, and wave a wand just because, and all of a sudden you have awareness of your soul. This is done through inner navigation. And the only way you can awaken to the knowledge of your soul is you want it above all else. You're not like the saint that we read about in the story who's using spiritual language, but is not willing the awakening of his soul because he's too busy indulging the me and doing whatever feels good to him, even if it hurts others. That's not the path to awakening. That's the path to pain. So this inner resolve to move up the spiritual scale, to grow up. He says, this growing up is where we begin to either make a decision for the light, or we can actually become very mature in making a decision for the evil. This is something we don't really talk about. And the Gita wants us to know this, as does the Bible, really. In other words, when we're sitting here, we're kind of in this, again, juvenile, underdeveloped place within our mind where it's still all about me. And as we begin to make our spiritual journey, this growth or maturity begins to give us either you can go into service of others, or you can remain and develop service to yourself alone. You can increase your egoism to the point of mastery. You can be a very proficient deceiver, manipulator, and you can enjoy your senses and indulge yourself and take from others in a way that's magical and powerful. This is what the Gita is talking about. When we are still within this murkiness, we don't see it. And this is what Sri Aurobindo is going to point out. We don't see how there can be great men of good or great people of good and great people of evil. We don't see that. So this is what he says. What we actually see, that we, men, or he'll say men, I'm going to go with the politically incorrect statement. He's writing before 1950. Give me a break. He says, what we actually see, at least there are men above a certain level, right? And the men that are above a certain level fall very largely into two classes. Those who have a dominant force of a luminous nature, sattvic nature, turn towards knowledge, self-control, beneficence, perfection. And those who have a dominant force of a passionate nature, rajasic nature, turn towards egoistic greatness, satisfaction of desire, the indulgence of their own strong will and personality, which they seek to impose on the world. Not for the service of man or God, but for their own pride, glory, and pleasure. Okay? So one of the things that I do point out in these Sunday morning talks is I'm not telling you what to believe. But what I am doing, I'm trying to do, is bring you these classics of spirituality, East and West, and give you what they say in a way that hopefully John's not involved, and you can just hear it for yourself, think for yourself, make your own decisions, and see where this reality of what's being taught maybe lines up with your experience or sheds light on your experience, even if it might be uncomfortable or, again, where we're going, a little politically incorrect. But it's necessary in order to make your decision. He says now, speaking of these human beings that are more for their own indulgence, their own pride, their own glory, not for the service of man or God, right? For their own pleasure. These are the human representatives. Those who are of the light are the representatives in the Sanskrit tradition of the devas, the shining ones. And those who are in the dark are the danavas, or asuras, the gods and the titans. Okay? So again, when we are spiritually immature, we're not in those two classes. We are either making decisions in the direction of one or the other. Some have made their decisions already, right? The titans of industry. I digress. So then, very important here, a footnote by Sri Aurobindo. Am I boring you? I know. No? Okay, good. I told you it doesn't matter anyway. You're all extras in my movie. So Sri Aurobindo has a very important footnote here, and we would all do well to pay attention. Ignorance means avidya, right, in Sanskrit. So ignorance is the separative consciousness and the egoistic mind and life that flow from it, and all that is natural to the separative consciousness and the egoistic mind and life. So in other words, he's making a very important distinction again here between ignorance and where he's going to go next is falsehood. When we're spiritually immature, we're ignorant. We don't know. And because we don't know, we are thinking we're separate, and our life choices are coming from a belief that we're separate selves, and it's all part of this growth process that we're involved in. Falsehood is not ignorance. Falsehood, on the other hand, is not this avidya or ignorance, but an extreme result of it. It is created by an ashuric power. Ashura in Sanskrit is basically demonic, right? An ashuric power. Ashura means that you're fighting against God. That's what it means. So this ashuric power comes from the ignorance, right? It's falsehood, which intervenes in this creation and is not only separated from the truth and therefore limited in knowledge and open to error, but in revolt against the truth, or in the habit of seizing the truth only to pervert it. Okay? Again, this is all to inspire you, to lift you, so you can soar into the heights of your soul and relax into the calm of your spirit. This is all coming from Krishna, right? This is the song of God. There are many notes and motifs through the symphony. It's rich, it's full, and it covers every area and every psychological dynamic and everything that we're to confront in life. That's how we can make our informed decisions. That's how the mature will know themselves. They will not be blind or ignorant to anything, especially falsehood. These are the forces and beings that are interested in maintaining the falsehoods they have created in the world of the ignorance and in putting them forward as the truth, which men must follow, right, for democracy. Sorry. In India, they are termed Asuras, Rakshasas, Pishakas, who are in opposition to the gods, the powers of light. If there were no hostile forces and there were still the evolutionary world, there could be ignorance still, but not perversity in the ignorance. Right? We're children, we're growing, we're evolving. We're developing our spiritual identity, our connection to God. That still has to happen. We're still going to be in ignorance, growing out of the soil. But the perversity isn't necessary, right? That's what he's saying. We can rid ourselves of the falsehoods and those who are fighting against the light because they have an investment in keeping the children to stay children, right? Those who are in charge of the educational system in this country, I won't mention any names here, but there is one quote that I want to tell you. As he's funding the educational system, he says, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. So when we go to our public school system, we're not trained to think. When you go to the, upper echelon schools, you're trained to think. You're trained to be future leaders. We're trained to serve, obey, fall in line, remain children. Is this uncomfortable? No? So anyway, last thing here. So when we make this decision, we have to be aware of where we are choosing. If we are indulging the me, we are eventually laying seeds to become these future beings that are gripped by our passions, by our appetites, by self-indulgence, and we will actually grow that kind of soul. Your decisions matter, and they will have direct impact. And you can't say, I was ignorant of this. And this is maybe one of the reasons why we get a little shifty in here sometimes, because we want to drink the poison and say, oh, I didn't know. I didn't think of myself in that way. But you're still drinking the poison. You're still making decisions for the darkness. And you will reap what you sow. So this is what Aurobindo says. The man, if he does not stop short and abandon his way of error, has eventually the Ashura full born in him. Do you ever hear these stories of when the Manson family went to kill, again, something to brighten your morning, when they went to Sharon Tate's house and they were about to do the ritual and murder her? One of the girls in the Manson family said that she actually, when she got into the house, she didn't want to do it. And yet something else took over her and literally pushed her like an invisible wind to do it. And this is what Aurobindo's talking about. You invest in the wrong mentality, and you'll be growing it inside of you. And it will literally possess your choices after a while. You'll be pulled to do those things. So this is what he says. The man, if he does not stop short and abandon his way of error, has eventually the Ashura full born in him. And once he has taken that enormous turn away from the light and truth, he can no more reverse the fatal speed of his course because of the very immensity of the misused divine power in him until he has plumbed the depths to which it falls, found bottom, and seen where the way has led him. Right? You're still getting knowledge, You're seeing what a bad choice can do. The power exhausted and misspent, himself down in the lowest state of the soul nature, which is hell. Only when he understands and turns to the light does that other truth of the Gita come in, that even the greatest sinner, the most impure and violent evildoer, is saved the moment he turns to adore and follow after the Godhead within him. Then, simply by that turn, he gets very soon into the bright, luminous nature which leads to perfection and freedom. Okay? Leave you on that note. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, click the link. Support our service with a love donation. We thank you for that. Very appreciative. Does that stir up any thoughts or questions in you guys?
I like to think of, all the negative connotations of all the different, religious paths that I put judgment on. And one of them was born again. Born again Christian. And but I read something in the course today. I rest in God. I think it's 110. And that we have to be born again, like you were talking
Yeah.
all day today.
Yeah.
We came in, and until we recognize our divinity that resides within, and where our resting spot is.
Yeah. But there's still a distinction that we made this morning about the saint sitting under the tree, and his religion still kept him so close-minded. So we can say the words, born again, you must be born again. We can quote scriptures, chapter and verse, left and right, go to church every day and think that we're holy. But if we haven't had that inner transformation, if we haven't surrendered our will to God's will and undergone that deep shift, and now are being carried by the Spirit into the core of our being, then we can be just as bigoted and closed-minded as people that are not spiritual, so-called. Right? So it can really be, that's the distinction I would make there. So you're going to find spectrums of people in all these traditions, like the born-again experience. There are some beautiful souls that are growing there. So we can't dismiss a whole, movement, like you're saying. And at the same time, we want to use discernment and not say that the movement itself is all that we need focus on as a fact. No, there's subtlety to it.
I think, John, what I was thinking about is that my born again, what that comes to me is I don't want the judgment out there because I have to look at my brothers as the holy child of God.
Exactly.
And so I had a lot of judgment on that, but really, in the reality of it is I have to be born again, and in that born again, it reveals the
That's it.
peace and love of God. Because
Perfect.
I fragmented all the judgment, and really, it's not my job to judge other
Yeah.
than to be born again.
Yeah. You go to Monday nights, Course in Miracles. It sounds that way.
Well, yeah.
Even though you're late sometimes.
No, I'm late a little bit.
Let's bless the offering. Very thankful for the offering. We bless it with the intention that it be light in the world and that it help others find their true way to their soul. And so it is. Amen. Any final thoughts here? Get Dave.
Just one, I'm going to stand up again. I think everyone related to a lot of things, subconsciously and consciously to what you were saying. And I'm still trying to gather it all in. But I thought one thing was clear to me is that sometimes you're in the river, you're in the flow, and you may be aware, but sometimes all you can do is just float along with the current. And I remember being in the position of the guy in the tree and the robbers, okay? And things like that were happening because of the place and the time and the expectation I was in, what I had volunteered to do.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was don't think it was fair the way it came about, but I got them anyway. And now I'm at another crossroads.
Mhm.
Now what do I do with that gift? What do I do with that ability? And I think for me that continues through my life. Even if you're born again, one way or the other, you still remain at a crossroads on a daily basis. And therein lies the inspiration of God.
Yeah, there are decisions to make. Very good. Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. All right, let's seal the deal here. We recognize that wherever we find ourselves, we are truly resting within this oceanic oneness, whether we know it or not. And so we just make an effort right now to dial down the chatter and expand into God's embrace. And from this quiet place in the heart can come the knowledge that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Thank you for being here. Beautiful Sunday to you. See you again soon. Thank you.